Hi, I am Dr. Jacob Larson, and this is Read, Write, and Cite, a channel where I teach you how to read, write, and cite for your college classes. In this video, I'm going to be talking about some of the literary elements that you may come across when you're looking at poetry. I'm going to talk about, kind of explain some of these and how you might use them when you're writing a paper. So, let's get started. Okay, so there is an assignment that I give my students, and maybe you're running across a similar one, where they're assigned to read some poems and analyze them and break them down. Well, one way to do that is to look at the literary elements, the strategies, the devices that the author has used for her or his poem. So let's explain again what literary devices, what literary strategies are. They're kind of the elements that make a poem a poem, and they're they're kind of the terms we've come up with to describe the different characteristics and the different parts of a poem. Same is true for fiction, and I just recorded a video talking about that, if that's something that's helpful to you. Okay, so if you ask someone what's a poem, they're probably going to say, oh, rhymes. It's like cool. It's like it's in like stanzas, and it's about like flowers and love, and you're probably right. Not every poem is like that, but absolutely, lots of them are. So I'm going to talk about some of the devices, the literary elements, that make a poem, and I'm going to give you the short answer. There's a lot of poems that don't look like poems, and a lot of poems that do. The way it looks, the way it sounds, won't tell you that it's a poem. Short answer is, if someone calls it a poem, it's a poem. It could be one line. It could be 1,000 lines. It could be an epic story like the Odyssey or the Iliad that is very thick. Or it could be very short. It could be 2 lines, like a couplet. They're all things that we call poetry. The reality is, if you look at the history of poetry, poetry is older than what we think of today as novels and fiction, even. It was one of the earliest forms of storytelling. People would chant things, and those chants, we would probably think of it as a song. Well, it was poetry, right? And poetry has taken on a lot of different forms. Poetry became theater. Poetry eventually became, books and novels and stories. It's kind of the first type of literature that we had. It started out oral, eventually it was written down and recorded throughout history, and that's why it's so hard to define what it is, because today, as poets continue to adapt and experiment with this concept of what poetry is, it becomes new things all the time. So, poetry. That also makes it really hard to define and to limit it. Don't do that. Just try to explain the things that are characteristic of what you're specifically talking about, and don't try to put it in a box, because it doesn't like being in a box. All right. We have a lot of different kinds of poetry. It could be romantic, it can be didactic, it can teach a lesson. It doesn't have to, but it's going to have characteristics like its tone. What does it sound like? Is it being sarcastic? Is it being romantic? And these are sometimes hard to hear. A lot of poetry is not meant to be read. It's meant to be performed. It's meant to be listened to. Other poetry, like E. E. Cummings, you have to see it. You can't really perform, a leaf falling in loneliness, because it would be gobbledygook to say out loud. You have to see it, what it looks like on the page, because it's experimental. I'm going to read a poem. This is by Theodore Roethke, called My Papa's Waltz. What do you think of this tone? The whiskey on your breath, the whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. We romped until the pan slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle, and every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt, then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. Now, it's hard to catch everything when you aren't looking at it, right? And there's a lot of different ways I could have performed that. But does that sound like, something romantic? Or is there something to the tone? That there's something a little bit deeper and maybe even darker? Maybe even abusive and misunderstood. It's something that takes an extra reading, right? It's one of the things that's great about poetry is it doesn't have to be long, and it can have a whole lot of meaning and just a few words, which also infuriates a lot of students too. I get it. Okay, here's one of Emily Dickinson's poems that is not her best, but people like to put it in books. Emily Dickinson, she never meant for her poems to be published. But after she died, her sister found all these like 2,000 poems that she'd written. And she's like, I'm going to publish them. So she did. And that's why we have them. And that's why they don't have titles. We just use the first line. This is called I like to see it lap the miles. I like to see it lap the miles and lick the valleys up and stop to feed itself at tanks and then prodigious step around a pile of mountains and supercilious peer in shanties by the sides of roads, and then a quarry pair to fit its ribs and crawl between, complaining all the while in horrid hooting stanza, then chase itself downhill, and neigh like Boangeries, then, punctual as a star, stop, docile and omnipotent at its own stable door. And in all the imagery, all the description that appeals to your senses, that's imagery. What are you supposed to take away from it? It's about a train. Anyway, all right, so I could spend a month talking about poetry, but we're just trying to get through it really fast. Okay. Langston Hughes, theme for English B. Langston Hughes is one of my favorite poets from the Harlem Renaissance. He's talking about an English class he took at Columbia in this poem. Okay, I'm going to do my best, but it's... You see that? It's this one right here. It doesn't look like your traditional poem. It's got uneven stanzas, which are kind of like the blocks of text, right? We would think of them as paragraphs. It's not like Shakespeare, which is going to have very, very specific form or style, rhythm, and meter. Rhythm is kind of like the da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and the pace that naturally comes. This doesn't have that. I love that as someone reading poetry because it can be performed so many different ways. Whereas Emily Dickinson that we just read, there's going to be a rhythm to it, which I probably didn't follow. All right. Theme for English B by Langston Hughes. The instructor said, "Go home and write a page tonight, and let that page come out of you. Then it will be true." I wonder if it's that simple. I am 22, colored, born in Winston-Salem. I went to school there, then Durham, then here to this college on the hill above Harlem. I am the only colored student in my class. The steps from the hill lead down into Harlem, through a park, then I cross St. Nicholas, 8th Avenue, 7th, and I come to the Y, the Harlem branch Y, where I take the elevator up to my room, sit down, and write this page. It's not easy to know what is true for you or me at 22, my age. But I guess I'm what I feel and see and hear. Harlem, I hear you. Hear you, hear me, we two, you, me, talk on this page. I hear New York too. Me? Who? Well, I like to eat, sleep, drink, and be in love. I like to work, read, learn, and understand life. I like a pipe for a Christmas present or records? Bessie, Bop, or Bach? I guess being colored doesn't make me not like the same things other folks like who are other races. So, will my page be colored that I write? Being me, it will not be white, but it will be a part of you, instructor. You are white, yet a part of me as I am a part of you. That's American. Sometimes perhaps you don't want to be a part of me, nor do I want to be a part of you, but we are. That's true. As I learn from you, I guess you learn from me, although you're older and white and somewhat more free. This is my page for English B. I love that poem. Did it have some rhyme, some meter to it? Absolutely. If you go back, you listen to it, you look at it, it's definitely got some rhythm. It definitely rhymes, but it's not a da 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 da. That sort of rhythm and meter that we might see in Shakespeare. That very stark, strict, the words want to be just one way. That's not what Langston Hughes did there. So, let me get through a few more, and then I'll bring this around to one big thing. Okay. Irony. Dulce et decorum est. This is by Wilfred Owen, written during World War One, and he's describing being in the trenches during World War One. Again, it's not what you think of, like the Langston Hughes poem. It's not just like some pretty description of nature like we had with Emily Dickinson, which is just a creative description of a train, right? Langston Hughes, he was describing his experience in an English class with a white teacher. And he's talking about the connection that they have, whether they want it or not. This is talking about Wilfred Owen's talking about his experience during World War One. So here we go. Bent double, like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and toward our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshot. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of tired, outstripped 5 9s that dropped behind. Gas! Gas! Quick, boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time, but someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim, through the misty panes and thick green light, under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face like a devil's sick in sin, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori. We can interpret that a lot of different ways. My understanding is he's describing mustard gas hitting a trench during World War One. Everyone's fumbling to get their masks on. Someone's too late, and they watch him die. And then he talks about how this lie, and that's the phrase, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. It means it is sweet and proper to die for your country. And he says that that's not true, that's a lie. And, it's up to you, the reader, to interpret that and understand, is that true? Do I agree with that? Especially in the context of what he's just described, this horrible scene of being hit with mustard gas. So that's something that poetry can do. Did this rhyme? Did it have cacophony, words that had sounds that sounded consistent with the images that the author wanted you to hear? Was it beautiful? Was it ugly? Was it cacophonous, right? These are the kinds of things we can talk about in a paper about poetry. So if I were you and I was writing a paper about poetry, this is what I would do. I would take really good notes as I read it, and you probably read it several times because poems don't tend to be too long. And you'd think, okay, what can I say about this? What's interesting? Is it a consistent form? Is it not? So closed form is very specific in how it rhymes and its rhythm and its meter. Open form, it kind of breaks the rules and it kind of does what it wants, right? I read you some examples. And then what could you say about that? Well, in Wilfred Owen's Dulce et Decorum Est, the words are not pretty, and they kind of, the cacophony of the words, it reinforces the images. So you could talk about imagery. You could talk about the sound of the words and the tone, all those literary elements. And you could write a paper and you just give examples. And you're like, all right, in the beginning stanza, he talks about this. These are examples. This is what it means. This is how it reinforces my thesis. Does that kind of make sense? I hope that's helpful. All right. So if you search online and you search literary devices or literary elements, you're going to see big, long lists. And there's going to be a lot of words maybe you've never heard of before. Assonance and consonants and so many things like that. They're great, and maybe you could find something that is relevant to you. If I were you, I wouldn't overthink which devices you're trying to use. I would try to have a deeper original thought and express that with the strategies that the author uses by using rhyme, meter, consonants, the repetition of sounds, assonance, the repetition of like the vowels, right? Or, just come up with some really good, interesting interpretation. Talk about symbolism or something like that. The most important thing is you have something interesting to say. I explain this to my students. The difference between a B paper and an A paper. A B paper, you did all the things you're supposed to. An A paper, you did all the things you were supposed to, and you had some originality to it. You had some original insight. Some ideas that were yours. That's the difference. And maybe your teacher grades similarly, maybe not. But keep that in mind. If you're writing a paper and you're not adding anything new to the world, there's no point. It really is irrelevant in the scheme of academic research. Because, especially in literature, it's all about perspective. You adding your perspective to the world. And if you aren't adding your perspective, you're not doing what literary analysis papers are about. So I say that to encourage you to be brave. Come up with some original ideas. And as long as you can explain them and justify them, you're doing exactly what literary analysis is all about. That's it. I hope that this was helpful to you as you go write literary analysis papers about poetry. If you have questions, feel free to ask me in the comments below. I love answering questions. Yeah, I hope this was helpful. If you like this video, please like it. If you want to see more like this, you think this might help you with your English classes, please subscribe or check back. I have over 100 videos posted. Maybe I've already made something that would help you with what you need to do. And if this or any other video that I've made is helpful to you or someone you know, please share it. It might save them a lot of time and help them out. So thank you again for watching this. I'm Dr. Jacob Larson. This has been Read, Write, and Cite. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.